All right, everyone. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. Um, trying to, I was trying to get fancy with it and experiment with Linux, but apparently I'm not that good yet. So we'll figure it out eventually. Anyway, so welcome to my talk. I essentially am doing a talk on Ruby on Rails. Here are my notes, right? So I got into Ruby on Rails maybe like a month and a half ago. I have been messing around with it. This is actually my first time working with web development. I've never, ever, I've stayed away from it as long as I possibly could. My 8 to 5, I'm a cybersecurity analyst, mostly focused on infrastructure. So, I don't have a reason to, or up until now, I haven't really had a reason to mess around with web development. But then we started to notice an uptick in web attacks, and it was a little difficult for me to confidently say that we weren't compromised. So I finally bit the bullet, and I'm like, I gotta start getting better at this area. It's always been a weakness for me. So I'm looking around the market. What can somebody wants to join? And so I started looking around the market, shopping around, like what is an easy platform to learn web development? Because I don't know if y'all have messed around. I know we've heard it already. If you've tried messing around with JavaScript, Node.js, the JavaScript, okay, so JavaScript is the king of the web. It's baked right into the browser. Eventually, you're going to have to touch it. So I tried, okay, if you're going to learn JavaScript, I'm going to have to touch it anyway. Let's just do it right now. Terrible idea. Terrible idea, especially if you have no idea how web applications work in general. So I wasted, quite a few time, probably a couple of weeks trying to learn how the web worked with JavaScript development. And I left more confused, and I left more adamant that I'm never touching web apps again. But again, this stuff happened at work, and we use ASP.NET. So ASP.NET, again, if you don't know how to do web development, it's kind of a monster. There's a lot there. It's pretty heavy duty for a newbie, which I consider myself. So I revisited what can I use, and I thought about Python and Django, because the how would you say it? Like the syntax is almost like writing pseudocode. It's as close to English as possible. But unfortunately, I didn't find Python and Django until way after I picked up Ruby on Rails. So Ruby on Rails, it's an MVC framework, and we had the talk about ASP or Blazor, and a lot of the functionality kind of mimics over. In fact, I was really impressed by Blazor because I had seen it a couple of years ago, and I remember following it, being aware of it. So it was really, really cool to see those things. But so Ruby on Rails, it's been around for a really long time, probably like the 2000s, and they were adopted by Twitter and some big companies, and they moved off of the platform to other things. But let's just kind of go ahead and get started with some of this. So let's just open up VS Code here. That's a dead file. So Ruby on Rails, I was basically gonna, and another thing, guys, is that I am a big procrastinator, right? So we're essentially gonna be winging it live. I'm gonna try to build a web app for you in as best as I can. So here we go, right? So one of the cool things about Rails is that it has you can sort of just, let's see here, what do I have? This is an empty directory called Rails. So what I can do, once you install everything right on your computer, you can just do Rails new and then just type in blog. And what this command is going to do for you is get as much boilerplate code out of the way as possible. So creating your files, your configuration files. This is one of the strengths of Ruby on Rails, is that it's very opinionated in the sense that they assume a lot of things for you. That way you can just hop in and just start working. And that's a strength and a weakness. So for example, if you're a very small team, Ruby on Rails really empowers you to just sort of start building. And if you want to deviate from the assumptions or the opinions that they've made, you can go ahead and do that. It's not a problem. They're just trying to get all, again, this goes back to the JavaScript example. If you try to, if you install Node.js, you're essentially starting off, or whatever. You got a lot of stuff that you gotta tweak out of the box to get going. Rails just has everything for you, and it's trying to get you from an idea to, like, their slogan is "Hello World" to IPO. So they're trying to pipeline everything for you. That way you can sort of, like, when you finally do scale and you do have to move on to a bigger platform, Ruby on Rails is trying to take care as much as it possible until you get to that point, and then you can move on to something like ASP.NET or Go or JavaScript or one of these other frameworks. So here what we're doing is we have essentially created our files like we see here, new projects, right? These are all the files that command made, and then I ran bin Rails server. So that there's a Puma server in here, and it'll take all your files and push it to your browser, and you can go to it. And as we start to add components to this thing, we're gonna start to see how this thing comes alive. So another thing that's very common, I'm gonna cancel this real quick. Another thing that's very common in the MVC pattern is building out a model, building out a controller, and building out your views. So that, again, that's pretty common. So what Rails does for you is they sort of consolidate that into a single command, and it is. Oops, my copy paste did not work. It's called the scaffold command because, again, this is a very common thing to be doing. So this is one of the things. Ruby on Rails, one of the most powerful features in it is called active record. What that does is it is considered an object relational mapping or something like that. Essentially, what it's trying to do, if you're trying to build out a product very fast, you want to do the least amount of complex work as possible. So what this does is it allows for you to not have to type in SQL queries manually. You do most of your work, or if not all your work, in Ruby. And so what this is going to do is it's going to leverage active record, and it's going to create a table with the column title, the data type string, and it's going to make another column called body, and with the data type of text. And this is something that you would do if you were doing, like, if this was like 2005 and we were working with the LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, you would see, and again, this is like, if you ever done web app hacking, some of the older projects, they leverage the LAMP stack to show you how SQL injections work, and you can open that project up and you can see the SQL queries that have been typed in there. Ruby on Rails with active record, you don't see SQL queries in the code. You just see Ruby code. So let's go ahead, and so right there, what we did again is we created tables. Let's go and open up that project. So blog to this one, yes, hopefully. Okay, so we're in a project that we just created. So we've done two things. We've created boilerplate code, and we just created the models, the controllers, and the views for this thing called article. Okay, let's go back. So, oh, you know what? I opened the wrong folder. Need to go up one. There we go. Okay, so this is all of our stuff, right? So we have the app directory. This is where the majority of your stuff is going to be in. We have controllers, we have models, and we have views. Okay, so here we have our articles controller. Essentially, what controllers do is when your browser sends a GET request for, like, let's say you want to go to index, like the home page. So hold on, you know what? Let me just make sure, just to be even better of an example, let me just go to my routes. So here are my routes. Essentially right now, whoops. How do you delete a line? So right now we have this thing called resources, articles, right? Let's ignore that for now. But then we have this get request right here. So this is going to, this file right here is sort of like your networking for your application. So whenever a request comes in, it's going to check, is this a get request? Is it a post request? What kind of HTTP verb is this? So you could do, post, up, and then whatever action you want to do, right? But in this example, we have a get request for the index up. That's going to translate to Rails health, and then there's an action in there called show. So let's see if we can go and find that file. So Rails, is there a health here somewhere? I've actually never tried to find this file. Maybe we should just ignore that, yeah? Anyway, so let's move on, right? So there's this other thing up here called, let me see if I can make this bigger. Nope, that's not it. That's even worse. So there's this thing called resources, and then Ruby uses these things, like instead of, I don't know what the difference is, but there's symbols, right? And it's almost like a variable, but it's complicated. But let's just assume that this is a variable, even though it's not, it's a symbol, and they work kind of different. But so there's this thing called resources. Resources, what that's going to do is it's going to get the most common, essentially like for create, read, update, delete, all of those actions that the clients end up doing is encapsulated in resources. So instead of having to type out every single route, I can just type resources and then my table or the object and which is articles. And so what we can do is we can verify that by going to, I think it's bin Rails and then routes. See what that pops up. So these are all of my routes. And can I map? No, that's probably gonna break. So when I ran scaffold articles, it created this stuff for me right here. So we have articles, get, and then we have this dash articles right here. So essentially what this is saying is if you see a get request with this string, the slash articles, you should get redirected, or the controller will tell you, the router will say, go to this folder or go to this file and run the index command. So let's see what happens. Hopefully, man, I hope this works. Oh, whoops, I'm not running. So let's do bin Rails server. That's misspelled. And you know what's funny is that I tried doing this like 2 weeks ago and it was a disaster and I did not learn my lesson. And here I am doing the same thing again. So, oh, look at that. So, okay, so actually, you know what? This is a great error because we created all this stuff, right? But it's abstract. When we talked about the database, like Ruby code, it's all like you're writing it and it's all abstract and it's not persistent until you push it. So what we have to do before we try launching this is we need to push all those creative files. We need to migrate them to the database. So let's go ahead and do that. So okay, so we've now pushed our code to the database. So if we rerun our Puma server, we should be able to finally come here now. There we go. Yay. Hello world, right? Okay, so this is the articles. This is essentially what we've created. And what we did with that scaffold command is we've added all the functionality to create an article, read an article, update it, and delete it. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's do new article. We'll say hello world. And then we'll say I am on Rails. And then we'll create that article. And then let's do something like, let's edit this article. Let's do edit to hello world. We'll update it. And you know, this is very simple, right? But I just wanted to show you the speed at which these things, the Rails gives you. And if we go back to our Puma server, we're recording all the interactions, right? So what we see here is that the Puma server, the HTTP server, it received a GET request for the articles in our path, right? The URI path. And so what it did is it went to active record, it loaded the file, it did some processing, and see here you can see that there was rendering done. So you know, we'll get into that a little bit if we have time. And so what it does is it kicks back. It'll do all of its magic on the back end, and then it'll send you articles index.html.erb, and that's essentially what we saw. And then I was like, well, I want to create a new article object. That button was mapped to article/new. So it has a route for what new leads you to, and new will lead you to the it'll take you to the articles controller #new, and it'll do its magic again. And so what I want to show you eventually down here is, so after we created new, right, we wanted to make an object. And here we see that there's a post request that the Puma server is receiving. And it's going to take the data that I inputted. And here we see that even though we haven't done a single line of SQL, Ruby on Rails knows how to translate your Ruby code into the proper SQL queries needed to handle the action that you're trying to do. And then, so once we pushed it to the database, we wanted to read. We wanted to go and see, you know, or let's go back to articles, like show this article, like I want to see it, right? That action is get articles and then the ID of whatever object you're trying to read. And again, it translates it into the proper SQL code. So, and here, see, we made an update to the object itself. It found the proper SQL code. And so pretty cool, right? Because SQL is not difficult to do, but it gets tedious to constantly have to type. It's mainly the same thing over and over. It's just a little bit tweaking here and there, but what if you could just sort of like wrap SQL around whatever language you're trying to work with? That's what Ruby on Rails has done for you. So you can just focus on writing Ruby code and you don't have to get into the nitty-gritty of SQL queries, right? So let's see here. What else can we talk about? We talked about routing a little bit. How do I move? There we go. Whoops. Talking about routing. Let's get into the views, right? So, let's talk about the controller a little bit. So here we have the controller, and then I'm also going to open up the views just so that you can kind of see how this is working. Index. Okay, yeah, that's a good one. So we'll do that, and then here we'll do controllers. Okay, so when we do something like, when we write something like get, that was perfect. So this is essentially what's happening here. Is your browser says, I want to get this link, 127.0.0 or you know, myapp.com/articles. The router is going to say, okay, this path right here, it's going to be like what I'm going to respond with is I'm going to go to this controller articles, and then I want to find whatever's in index, and then I'm going to send that back. Okay, so let's go to the articles controller. So this is the articles controller. Here, we can close this out. It's not big. No biggie. So this is the articles controller folder or file, right? And you have all this stuff that's happening, which, you know, it's a lot to talk about right now. But let's just say here's that action that the router was saying. It's like go to articles and find the index function. So here we have the index function, and inside index, what we're doing is we're parsing the database, we're taking everything, and we're returning it has this this variable right here, articles. Okay, so another thing that Ruby on Rails does for you is by usage, it uses this naming convention where it'll singular and pluralize. I don't know if that's correct. Names and functions, and it does all this naming where you see here how we have article. Article is referring to the model of the database, and then it'll do articles plural for like creating variables and stuff. So, and this function is called index. And coincidentally, if I go to my views and I open up my articles folder, I see that I have an index file. So it sort of like standardizes the naming scheme. That way, when you their index is mentioned like 3 times all over the place, and if you hit it, it'll follow it through all the way for you as like an efficient pipeline. So this function, when it gets triggered from that GET request for articles, it'll do this stuff on the database, and then it'll put it into the file that it's going to return. So let's go to the index file, which is this one right here. And so you have this HTML code, right? But then you also have mentions of this article variable. So this HTML is it's called HTML templating, and it's a pretty efficient way of doing it. Instead of, I guess, it essentially what it'll do is it's the concept that you should only write it one time and not have to repeat yourself. So what you can do is this page, for the most part, is going to stay the same, and the only thing that you should be doing is dynamically changing the data every time or something changes. So what you can do is you put a variable in there. You keep all the HTML the same, and the only things that change is the data that you're trying to pull out. And with Ruby, or Ruby on Rails, what you can do is you can put this Ruby code, shove it inside the HTML template. That way, the Ruby code is responsible for dynamically grabbing the data that you need. So in a way, like it makes it efficient. You write it one time. You don't really need to go back to this once you've had it. And again, all of this was done. We have the show command, we have the show function, we have the new function, and so all of this code was sort of made for me. And I can focus on adding features very quickly. It really empowers you to move fast, develop fast. So that's MPC. I did my best to describe MPC, but what else I want to show you is sort of like the other things that Ruby on Rails has in its ecosystem. So one of the cool things is prior to maybe like 2016. With Ruby on Rails, you would have to pair it with something like React JavaScript, because it didn't really have strength in the client side of things. Its strength was server-side rendering. But around 2016, they created this thing called Hotwire. And what Hotwire does is it allows for you to do what the problem that React solved, which is making components on your HTML template. And so with Hotwire, you can put Ruby code inside an HTML template and dynamically change it when a user clicks on something and they want interactivity. So you can think about something like a calendar, right? When you have a calendar app and let's say you have an event every Monday for the whole month. Well, if I delete that event, it's not just going to delete from one week. It needs to delete from all of them. So you have to figure out how to dynamically delete that without having to re-render the whole template. And it's more efficient by just changing the parts of the template versus having to take the whole file and send it back over the wire. It helps with latency, it helps with speed, and the main thing that it does is those are basically the major parts. Another thing that Ruby on Rails has done with Hotwire is they've also added native compatibility, right? So on the Blazor app, I think that those are called progressive web apps, where you can sort of like have it offline and it still works. They're trying to tinker with it. They're trying to get it up and running. I think this past month they made some really big strides in the native applications. The only thing that I will tell you though is that because Ruby on Rails is a server-side framework, like mainly strong in that area, if you, for example, one of the problems that it creates is if the user is in a place where they don't have internet connection, how can you get that data to them, right? So that's been a big problem for them, and I think this past month or two, they have developed a way to get progressive web apps where you can download the app, store the, or cache the data there. So that's Hotwire native. Another thing that they've done is they're trying to do this whole idea of no pass, so no platform as a service. From beginning to end, you should be able to deploy your application, and like the whole idea of having a platform as a service, it's like there's sort of like there's a whole opinion there, but essentially what I want to explain to you is that pass services are really expensive. If you go look at Heroku, they're charging $30 for like half a gigabyte of RAM and maybe like one CPU and like 50 gigs of storage. It's super, super expensive. And you know, that's obviously like a pet project price. If you want to serve to production, you know, hundreds, thousands of users, they're going to charge you astronomical prices. So what Ruby on Rails has done, the ecosystem, is they've developed tools for you to take your application and to easily push it to a server somewhere that you own, or you know, if it's in the cloud, sure, but they're really trying to like exit the cloud type of mentality. So they have this tool called Kamal, and what Kamal does is essentially what it will do is it'll take your web app and it will deploy it using Docker and a ton of other, there's a ton of other tools in here. I still haven't done it yet. I'm trying to wrap my head around it because, you know, once you, this will take you live. So, so they have this tool for that. It basically utilizes Docker, and I have seen it ran before. It's super, super simple. Like, if you don't know how to push your application to the edge or to production, it's kind of, it's an overwhelming task if you've never done it before. And Kamal, based on the demos that I've seen, it's super cool. Like you just write your Docker file, you put the stuff that you need in there, it'll take that for you, it'll push it to a server, it'll create your SSH keys for you. It's a super, super cool tool. And then lastly, the last thing I wanted to mention is they've also done this thing called the solid trifecta. The solid trifecta is really cool because it sort of alleviates your need from having to utilize tools like Redis. Redis is super expensive. I mean, it solves the problem for you, right? Which is you need in-memory caching, you need quick, fast caching for, like, let's say you're running your application is something like a chat feature or like Google Chat, right? You're trying to redo Google Chat. What they've done here is they've created a way for you to use the database as like a Redis replacement. It's not going to get you the speed of Redis, but again, this whole philosophy is they're trying to take as much complexity out as possible. So, you know, you could think of this framework as, you know, driving like a Honda Civic. Like, it's going to get you from one point to the other reliably, quickly. You don't have to worry about, you know, like what if my car doesn't start? It's not an F1 car. It's not going to break on you. There's not all this crazy maintenance that you need to be doing. Like, if you've ever used JavaScript, like sometimes you need to update or the package changes and something breaks. You can start your application a month from now and it's broken. You don't know why. So they've done a whole thing about trying to take as much complexity out as possible. So what we have here is there's solid cable, solid cache, and solid queue. And this is their attempt of maximizing the usage of the database, which, you know, if your most web applications, I would think, are CRUD, like create, read, update, delete. So you're going to be working cache things on there to use jobs. That's another thing, like on platform as a service, like Heroku or Render, you have to pay extra to do jobs on the side. So, and that's super important if if your user is trying to do something, and so for example, if you don't have jobs and your user wants something done in the background, they have to wait for that process to complete and come back, and then you can move on to the next one. And it's very disruptive. It makes your application very slow. So they figured out a way to do it on the database, which you're already using. And so there's a lot of pretty cool things about this. They've also figured out a way for you to do authentication. You can set up authentication in a single command line, and you can do MFA and everything like that. So that's pretty cool for me, because when you're writing, you don't need to be an expert in creating these systems yourself. They're prepackaged for you to use. So that's kind of what I had today to share with y'all. Ruby on Rails is pretty cool. And if y'all have any questions, we could talk about it more on the Discord. But yeah, and that's what we got. Thank you so much.